A masked man, burning with rage, set out to take revenge on a royal guard, swinging a heavy chain to break his discipline. But in seconds, the tables turned, leaving him as the one gasping for air. Here's how it happened. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Also, make sure to check out our second channel, Guard Patrol, linked in the pinned comments, because we upload daily at the same time on both channels. So, subscribe to both and never miss a powerful story. The chain clinked softly inside his jacket pocket as Thomas Keller surveyed Windsor Castle's main courtyard. His eyes, cold with purpose, fixed on the solitary royal guard standing at attention against the ancient stone walls. The scarlet uniform made a perfect target, a living symbol of everything he'd grown to hate. "Today, someone finally pays," he whispered behind his black mask, fingers caressing the heavy metal links. Sergeant James Harrington detected the threat before seeing it. 8 years of combat instinct, honed through 2 blood-soaked tours in Afghanistan and another in Iraq, sent warning signals through his body, even as he maintained his ceremonial stillness. The military cross pinned to his chest hadn't come from standing motionless for tourists. The masked figure, moving against the crowd's flow, cut a jarring presence among the camera-clicking visitors. While children pointed excitedly at Harrington's bearskin cap and families posed for photos, this man approached with predatory intent. Combat boots partially visible beneath worn jeans, hands concealed in pockets, eyes never wavering from his target. An elderly veteran with a walking stick noticed too, his weathered hand tightening on the polished wood as he tracked the approaching threat. "Trouble coming," he muttered to himself, recognizing the stance of someone with violent intentions. "Darling, I don't like this," a mother whispered, pulling her daughter closer as the masked man passed. "Something's not right." Tourists instinctively parted, conversations dying mid-sentence as the figure cut through their midst. The casual joy of the morning evaporated, replaced by the electric tension that precedes violence. The masked man stopped 15 feet from Harrington, stance widening as he prepared to make his move. When he spoke, his voice carried enough venom to silence the entire courtyard. "So this is Britain's finest," he announced, loud enough for nearby visitors to turn, "standing pretty for the cameras while the country crumbles." The accent was local, London with rough edges, educated but bitter. "Must be nice playing dress-up while the rest of us deal with reality." Harrington remained motionless, his eyes fixed forward as years of discipline held firm against the deliberate provocation. The ceremonial rifle in his white-gloved hands remained precisely positioned, not a muscle betraying the heightened alertness now coursing through his combat-ready mind. The masked man took another step forward, his right hand still concealed in his pocket. "I've been watching you for days," he continued, his voice dropping to a menacing register. "All of you. Standing guard over what exactly? A system that's failed everyone except the privileged few?" Several tourists began backing away, sensing the brewing confrontation. A father hurried his curious children toward the exit, while others reached for phones, some to record, others to call for help. The veteran with the walking stick remained, his posture straightening with old military bearing as he observed the unfolding scene with grave concern. The masked man tilted his head, studying Harrington with cold calculation. "I wonder what it takes," the masked man continued, circling Harrington like a predator sizing up its prey, "to make one of you famous statues actually move." His voice carried across the courtyard, drawing unwanted attention from the growing crowd of onlookers, besides the choreographed marching you do for the tourists, of course. Harrington remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed forward, but his senses heightened to combat readiness. 8 years of military training had prepared him for moments like this, provocations designed to test his resolve. In Afghanistan, he'd maintained his position under sniper fire for 3 hours to protect his unit, a civilian with a grudge barely registered on his scale of threats. "Nothing to say?" The masked man drew closer, close enough now that Harrington could detect the faint smell of cigarettes and something sharper, whiskey perhaps, consumed recently enough to still cling to his breath despite the mask. That's the problem with you lot, isn't it? All show, no substance. A young mother hurriedly guided her children away from the scene, whispering urgent instructions as they passed an elderly couple who had stopped to watch with evident concern. The veteran with the walking stick had positioned himself strategically, a weathered sentinel ready to intervene if necessary. "You know what I think?" The masked man's voice dropped lower, intended now for Harrington alone. "I think beneath all that pageantry, you're just another government tool, not allowed to think, not allowed to speak, not allowed to actually protect anything that matters." He stepped directly into Harrington's line of sight, forcing eye contact. "Did they train the humanity out of you in those fancy barracks, or did you never have any to begin with?" The mask shifted slightly with each word, the black fabric rippling over a face consumed with something darker than mere disrespect. Two security guards had noticed the confrontation from across the courtyard and began moving in the direction of the disturbance, their pace measured but purposeful. The masked man spotted them too, his posture tensing momentarily before he doubled down on his provocations. "Your kind stood by while this country was sold to the highest bidder," he hissed, loud enough for nearby tourists to hear his accusations. "Protecting palaces while neighborhoods burned, standing at attention while ordinary people lost everything." His finger jabbed toward Harrington's chest, stopping just short of physical contact. "Do you even know what's happening out there beyond these walls? Do you care? Or is standing pretty for the Instagram photos enough to help you sleep at night?" A middle-aged woman in a floral dress stepped forward unexpectedly. "Young man, that's quite enough," she said, her home county's accent crisp with disapproval. "These guards deserve our respect, not your abuse." The masked man whirled toward her, his body language instantly threatening. "Respect?" He spat the word like poison. "For what exactly? For maintaining the illusion that everything's fine while the world falls apart?" The woman faltered, taking an instinctive step back. Her husband moved to her side, his expression hardening as he placed a protective arm around her shoulders. "Mind your own business," the masked man warned them, his attention momentarily diverted from Harrington. "This isn't your fight." "Perhaps not," the husband replied evenly, "but harassing a guardsman doing his duty isn't a fight at all. It's just bullying." The masked man's laugh was hollow beneath the black fabric. "Duty? Is that what we're calling it now?" He turned back to Harrington, who remained motionless despite the tension crackling through the air. "Let me tell you about duty. My brother did his duty too. Royal Marines. Came back from his third tour with half his mind missing. Where was his protection? Where was his fancy ceremony?" Something in his voice shifted then, raw pain bleeding through the anger. For a brief moment, the real motivation behind his hostility became clear before the rage consumed it once more. "They use you," he said, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper as he leaned closer to Harrington. "They dress you up, stand you here like decorations, and when they're done with you, they'll discard you just like they did him. Just like they do all of us who aren't born with silver spoons in our mouths." The security guards were drawing closer now, their radios crackling with low communications. The masked man noticed them approaching and seemed to make a decision, his stance shifting subtly from confrontational to something more dangerous. "You're not even listening, are you?" he said, his voice rising again as he stepped even closer to Harrington. "That's what makes this so perfect. You can't respond, can't defend yourself, can't do anything but stand there and take it." His right hand emerged from his pocket, empty for now, but flexing with purpose. "Makes me wonder what would happen if someone decided to really test those famous reflexes of yours." The veteran with the walking stick had seen enough. He moved with surprising agility for his age, positioning himself within the masked man's peripheral vision. "Son," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of command. "Whatever point you're trying to make, this isn't the way to do it." The masked man barely glanced at him. "Stay out of this, old man. Your generation had its chance to fix things. Now you just prop up the same broken system and call it tradition." "That guardsman," the veteran continued undeterred, "has likely seen more combat than you could imagine. He stands here not because he's a decoration, but because duty means something to him, something perhaps you've forgotten." The masked man's entire body tensed, coiled like a spring about to release. "Duty," he repeated, the word twisted with contempt. "Let me show you what I think of your precious duty." His hand slipped back into his jacket, this time with clear purpose. The surrounding tourists gasped collectively, several backing away quickly, while others remained frozen in horrified fascination. A father shielded his daughter's eyes, uncertain what was about to unfold, but instinctively protecting her from witnessing it. "It's time," the masked man announced, his voice rising to address the entire courtyard. "Someone reminded these toy soldiers what they're really here for, and what happens when the people they're supposed to protect decide they've had enough pretending." The masked man's hand emerged from his jacket, revealing a length of heavy chain that caught the morning light with dull metallic gleams. Not the lightweight, decorative kind used for fashion, but industrial-grade links that could secure machinery or heavy gates. He let it dangle from his fist, the weighted end swinging hypnotically near his knee. "Wondering what this is for?" he asked, his eyes never leaving Harrington's impassive face. "I've been curious about something. Those bearskin caps you wear, they're strapped under your chin, aren't they? Makes me wonder how secure they really are." The chain clinked softly as he adjusted his grip, wrapping one end around his knuckles while letting the remainder hang in a threatening loop. The sound cut through the sudden silence that had fallen over the courtyard, punctuated only by the hurried footsteps of tourists retreating to safer distances. "Sir, put that down immediately," one of the approaching security guards called out, his hand moving to his radio. "Back away from the Queen's Guard!" The masked man barely acknowledged the warning, his focus entirely on Harrington now. "You know what chains symbolize, don't you? Bondage, restriction, control." Each word was punctuated by a slight swing of the chain. "Everything your uniform represents to people like me." The veteran with the walking stick had positioned himself strategically to one side, his weathered face grim with understanding. He'd seen that look before, the 1,000-yard stare of someone about to cross a line they couldn't uncross. His left hand discreetly signaled to a young mother nearby to move her children further back. "My brother wore a uniform too," the masked man continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Came back with medals they told him meant something. Couldn't sleep without screaming. Couldn't walk down a street without checking for snipers." The chain swung wider now, gathering momentum. "When he finally broke, your precious military discharged him. Damaged goods, they said." A police officer had entered the courtyard now, responding to an alert from palace security. He assessed the situation with professional calm, speaking quietly into his shoulder radio as he began a careful approach. The masked man seemed oblivious to the expanding response, lost in his own narrative of grievance and planned retribution. "He used to tell me about the famous discipline of the Queen's Guard, how nothing could make you break position." His head tilted as he studied Harrington. "Let's test that, shall we?" He took a deliberate step closer, the chain now swinging in a controlled arc beside him. "They train you well, don't they? Stand still while tourists mock you. Stand still while they take selfies. I wonder—" His voice hardened. "Will you stand still for this too?" An American tourist who had been filming the confrontation and finally lowered his phone, the reality of the situation overriding his desire to capture it. "Hey man, that's enough," he called out, his Midwestern accent thick with concern. "This isn't right." "None of this is right," the masked man snapped back, without looking away from Harrington. "That's the whole point." The chain made a soft whispering sound as it cut through the air in practiced movements. This wasn't improvisation. The masked man had handled chains before, knew their weight and reach, understood how to wield them effectively. His stance shifted subtly into something more balanced, more prepared. "I've thought about this moment," he admitted, his voice carrying that strange, intimate quality that comes with long-planned confrontations. What it would feel like to make one of you finally react. To strip away the ceremony and see what's really underneath all that pomp. The police officer had nearly reached them now, his hand resting cautiously on his equipment belt. "Sir, I need you to drop the chain and step back," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. For the first time, the masked man seemed to register the expanding circle of authority closing in around him. His head turned slightly, taking in the police officer, the security guards, the gathered crowd of witnesses with their phones raised like digital eyes, recording his every move. Rather than deterring him, the audience seemed to harden his resolve. "Perfect," he muttered. "Let them all see what happens when symbols meet reality." With practiced movement, he lengthened the chain between his hands, creating a garrote-like configuration that left little doubt about his intentions. The weighted end swung outward in a controlled arc before he caught it in his left hand, measuring the distance to Harrington with calculated precision. "You lot think these guards are untouchable," he called out loudly, now playing to the wider audience. "Sacred because of tradition, but traditions can be broken, just like men." The veteran stepped forward, his walking stick planted firmly on the cobblestones. "Son, whatever happened to your brother won't be solved this way," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had seen real combat. "That guardsman isn't your enemy." "They're all part of the same system," the masked man replied, but something in the veteran's words had reached him, causing the briefest hesitation, a flicker of doubt crossing his eyes before the rage consumed it again. His grip on the chain tightened, knuckles whitening with deadly purpose. "Sometimes," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you have to make a statement that can't be ignored." The chain rose higher, poised like a serpent about to strike, "and I'm done being ignored." The chain whipped through the air with vicious intent, the masked man lunging forward in one fluid motion. Years of harboured resentment and rage channeled into a single explosive attack as he threw the heavy links toward Harrington's neck. "Let's see your discipline now, soldier," he shouted, his voice breaking with a mixture of fury and satisfaction as the chain arced toward its target. What happened next occurred so quickly that many onlookers would later disagree about the exact sequence of events. The chain, which had seemed destined to wrap around Harrington's throat, instead met empty air, as the guard executed a pivot that military historians would have recognized as a textbook defensive maneuver. 8 years of combat training overrode ceremonial protocol in an instant. Harrington's body, which had stood motionless for hours, suddenly demonstrated why the Queen's Guard were soldiers first and ceremonial figures second. His ceremonial rifle, often mistaken by tourists as merely decorative, moved in perfect coordination with his body, deflecting the chain with a precision that spoke of countless training hours. The masked man staggered, thrown off balance by the unexpected defense and the momentum of his own attack. His eyes widened behind his mask, the first flicker of fear replacing his previous certainty. This wasn't the passive target he had anticipated. "What the?" he gasped, scrambling to regain both his footing and his weapon. Harrington moved with controlled economy, each action deliberate and measured. There was nothing theatrical about his response, no wasted motion, no excessive force, just the clinical efficiency of a soldier neutralizing a threat. The ceremonial rifle, which moments before had been held in parade position, was now a defensive tool in the hands of someone who knew precisely how to use it. "Stay down," Harrington ordered, his voice carrying the unmistakable command presence of a combat veteran. It was the first time he had spoken, And the contrast between his previous silence and the authority now radiating from him stunned the onlookers into silence. The masked man ignored the warning, desperation replacing his earlier confidence. He lunged again, the chain whistling through the air in a wild arc. "Fight back properly!" he screamed, his carefully constructed plan unraveling with each passing second. "Show everyone what you really are!" Harrington sidestepped the attack with surprising agility, considering his ceremonial attire. The bearskin cap remained perfectly positioned despite his movement, a testament to both proper fastening and ingrained military bearing. His response was not the mindless aggression his attacker seemed to crave, but rather the controlled precision of someone trained to use exactly the level of force required, no more, no less. "Last warning," Harrington stated, his voice level despite the adrenaline now coursing through his system. "Drop the weapon and stand down." Instead, the masked man charged forward with reckless abandon, the chain raised for a direct strike. Harrington met the attack with a perfectly timed maneuver that redirected the momentum against his assailant. The sound of the chain clattering against the cobblestones echoed through the courtyard as it was dislodged from the attacker's grip. What followed was a demonstration of close-quarters combat expertise that left no doubt about the reality behind the ceremonial uniform. Harrington moved inside the masked man's guard, using a combination of his forearm and the ceremonial rifle's wooden stock to control and redirect the attack. The masked man found himself suddenly airborne, his own momentum used against him in a textbook takedown that ended with him flat on his back, the wind knocked from his lungs. Before he could recover, Harrington had secured him in a restraint hold that immobilized without causing undue injury. The entire sequence, from initial attack to complete neutralization, had taken less than 12 seconds. "He's got him!" someone in the crowd shouted, followed by scattered applause that quickly spread among the onlookers. The police officer arrived at Harrington's side, handcuffs already drawn. "Secure," Harrington reported calmly, maintaining the hold until the police officer could take over. Despite the physical exertion, his breathing remained measured, his uniform barely disturbed save for the slight shift of his red tunic. The masked man struggled against the restraints, his earlier bravado replaced by impotent rage and dawning realization. "You don't understand," he gasped, his voice muffled against the cobblestones. "None of you understand." "I understand more than you think," Harrington replied quietly, his voice pitched only for his attacker's ears, "including what it means to lose brothers in arms. But this isn't the way to honor them." The police officer secured the handcuffs with practiced efficiency. "I'll take it from here," he told Harrington with professional respect. "Well handled, Sergeant." As the officer began reciting the formal caution, the masked man's struggles intensified. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "You were supposed to just stand there and take it. That's what you do." "That's where you're wrong," Harrington replied, stepping back as additional security personnel arrived to assist with the detainment. "We stand guard. There's a difference." Two palace security guards helped the police officer lift the still struggling man to his feet. As they did, his mask dislodged, revealing a young face marked by both rage and raw grief, perhaps no more than 25, with features that hinted at the family resemblance to the brother he had mentioned. "My brother died because of what that uniform represents," he spat, tears now mixing with his anger. "They used him up and threw him away when he was broken." Harrington's expression remained professional, but something in his eyes acknowledged the pain behind the attack. "Your brother's service deserves better than this," he said quietly, "and so does his memory." For a moment, the young man's rage seemed to falter, reality breaking through his carefully constructed narrative. His gaze dropped to the chain now lying harmlessly on the cobblestones, the weapon that was supposed to make his statement, to force a reaction, to prove something about the system he blamed for his brother's suffering. Instead, all it had proven was that beneath the ceremonial exterior of the Queen's Guard was something far more substantial, not an empty symbol, but a trained soldier who understood both duty and the controlled application of force. "Take him," instructed the police officer to his colleagues, maintaining a firm grip on the subdued attacker. The masked man, now unmasked, continued to struggle, though the fight had largely gone out of him after Harrington's words about his brother's memory. As the authorities secured him, Sergeant Harrington retrieved his ceremonial rifle, which had been momentarily set aside during the restraint. With practiced movements that spoke of years of drill, he inspected it for damage before returning it to its proper position. His actions were methodical and precise, even in the aftermath of violence. "You're making a mistake," the young man called out as they began to lead him away. "I'm not the enemy here. The system is the same system that got my brother killed." Harrington paused, something in the attacker's desperate plea resonating with him. With a subtle nod to the police officer, he approached the restrained young man, maintaining a professional distance, but close enough to speak, without being overheard by the gathered crowd. "What was your brother's name?" Harrington asked, his voice deliberately lowered. The question seemed to catch the young man off guard. His struggles ceased momentarily as confusion replaced anger. "What?" "Your brother, the Royal Marine, what was his name?" "David," he answered after a pause, suspicion evident in his tone. "Staff Sergeant David Keller, 40 Commando." Harrington nodded with evident recognition. "Afghanistan, 2010, Helmand Province." The young man's eyes widened in genuine shock. "You knew him?" "I knew of him," Harrington corrected. "His unit provided cover for my squad during an extraction under heavy fire. 3 of my men made it home because of Marine commandos like your brother." He maintained steady eye contact with the young man. "They died with honour and purpose, Mr. Keller, not as pawns in some corrupt system." For the first time, the young man's facade cracked completely. Tears welled in his eyes, no longer fueled by rage, but by grief that had never properly healed. "He didn't die there," he said bitterly. "He died in a bedsit in Birmingham 2 years later, after the nightmares became too much. After the help never came." Harrington's professional expression softened fractionally. "I'm sorry to hear that. Truly." He glanced down at the chain lying on the cobblestones. "But this dishonours everything he stood for." "What else was I supposed to do?" Keller demanded, though his voice had lost its earlier venom. Nobody was listening. Nobody cared. He was just another statistic, another broken soldier the system used up and forgot. "And attacking one of his brothers in arms was your solution?" Harrington asked quietly. "Do you think that's what David would have wanted?" The question hit its mark with devastating precision. Keller's shoulders slumped as the fight drained out of him completely. "You don't understand." "I understand better than you think," Harrington replied, and something in his voice made everyone listening believe him. "I've lost friends too, attended too many funerals, written too many letters to families." He gestured subtly to a barely visible scar near his temple, partially hidden by the bearskin cap. "Carried my own souvenirs back from the same war that marked your brother." The police officer watched this exchange with respectful patience, understanding the importance of what was transpiring. Around them, the crowd had grown silent, witnessing something far more powerful than the violence that had preceded it. "The uniform you tried to disgrace today," Harrington continued, "it represents the same values your brother upheld: duty, honour, service. Not blind obedience to a corrupt system, but commitment to principles that matter." He paused, allowing his words to register. "Attack those principles if you must, but understand what you're really destroying." One of the palace guards approached, carrying a wallet that had fallen from Keller's pocket during the scuffle. He handed it to the police officer, who opened it and examined the identification inside. "Thomas Keller," the officer read aloud, glancing up at the subdued young man. "We've had reports filed about you before. Disrupting a veterans' memorial service last month, vandalism at the Ministry of Defence. You've been building up to something like this for a while, haven't you?" Thomas didn't answer, his gaze still locked with Harrington's as though searching for something in the guardsman's disciplined features. "Your brother deserves to be remembered," Harrington said firmly, "but not like this. Never like this." The veteran with the walking stick had moved closer during this exchange, listening intently. Now he stepped forward, his military bearing evident despite his age. "Young man," he addressed Thomas directly, "I served 30 years in Her Majesty's Armed Forces, lost friends in every conflict from the Falklands to Iraq. The anger you're feeling, we've all carried it. But there are better ways to channel it than attacking the very institutions your brother gave his life to protect." Thomas's gaze shifted to the veteran, something like recognition flickering across his features. "What would you know about it?" he asked, but the question lacked his earlier hostility. "Enough to recognize grief masquerading as rage," the veteran replied simply. "And enough to know that healing starts when you stop looking for someone to blame and start honoring the sacrifice properly." The police were preparing to escort Thomas away, but Harrington raised a hand in subtle request for one final moment. When the officer nodded his assent, the guardsman addressed his would-be attacker one last time. "The Royal Marines have a support network for veterans' families," he said, his voice carrying no judgment, only professional concern. "They don't forget their own, even after they've fallen. When you're ready, I can make sure you're connected with people who can help. People who knew your brother, understood what he faced." Something shifted in Thomas's expression. A complex mixture of shame, grief, and the faintest glimmer of something that might eventually grow into gratitude. "Why would you help me?" he asked, genuine confusion replacing hostility. "After what I tried to do." Harrington's answer came without hesitation. "Because that's what your brother would have done. Marines don't leave anyone behind, not on the battlefield, and not after they've come home." What would you have done in Sergeant Harrington's position? Would you have responded with similar restraint and understanding? Or would anger have guided your actions? And what about Thomas Keller? Could his destructive grief eventually find healing through understanding the values his brother truly stood for? If this story resonated with you, please like and share it with others. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about tradition and duty. Hit that bell icon to never miss our uploads. Check out our other Royal Guard stories appearing on your screen now, each offering a unique perspective on the men who stand watch over history while making it themselves.